Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. The phone rang at 11:47 p.m., and Olivia knew immediately that something was catastrophically wrong. Mothers develop an instinct for these things, a primal alarm system that activates in the presence of danger to their children. She'd been dozing on the couch, waiting for Harper to call and confirm she'd made it to the ranger station at Cascade Ridge National Park, where her daughter had taken a summer job as a wildlife research assistant. The internship was supposed to be Harper's gateway into environmental science, a stepping stone toward the conservation career she'd dreamed about since childhood. Olivia fumbled for her phone, heart already hammering against her ribs. Harper's name glowed on the screen. Harper? Sweetheart, are you... Mom? The word came out as a strangled whisper, barely audible over what sounded like wind rushing through trees, but there was something else underneath it, something that made Olivia's blood run cold. Voices. Multiple voices speaking in overlapping whispers, creating a discordant chorus that seemed to pulse with malevolent intent. Harper, what's wrong? Where are you? They won't let me leave. Harper's voice cracked, and Olivia could hear her daughter's breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Mom, there are so many of them. They're all talking at once. They want me to. They're saying I belong here, that I've always belonged here. Olivia was already on her feet, grabbing her car keys from the kitchen counter. Harper, listen to me. Get to somewhere safe. Lock yourself in a building. I'm coming right now. There's no buildings anymore, Mom. The trail, it doesn't go anywhere. I've been walking for hours, but I keep ending up at the same place. The same clearing with the... Harper's voice dissolved into a sob. There are marks on the trees, carved into the bark. Names, Mom. So many names. And some of them are... they're glowing. The phone crackled with static, and through it, Olivia heard those other voices more clearly now. They weren't speaking English. They weren't speaking any language she recognized. The sounds were ancient and guttural, layered upon each other like geological strata of human suffering. Harper, stay on the phone with me, don't hang up. I'm getting in the car right now. Mom, they're saying you can't help me. That nobody can. That once you hear them, you're already part of them. They're showing me things. Memories that aren't mine. I can see. Harper's voice rose to a scream. Oh God, I can see how they died. All of them. Every single one. It's like watching 100 deaths at once and they're all... The line went dead. Olivia stared at her phone, her entire body trembling. She tried calling back immediately. It went straight to voicemail. She tried again and again. On the fourth attempt, something answered, but it wasn't Harper. Come find her, multiple voices said in perfect unison through her daughter's phone. Come find all of them. The forest is waiting. We are waiting. We have been waiting for so long. The call disconnected. Olivia stood frozen in her kitchen for exactly 5 seconds, her mind racing through possibilities, discarding rational explanations as quickly as they formed. Harper wasn't the type to play pranks. She wasn't dramatic or attention-seeking. She was level-headed, brilliant, cautious to a fault. Whatever was happening to her daughter was real. She looked at the clock. 11:51 p.m. Cascade Ridge National Park was a 4-hour drive from Portland. Olivia grabbed her hiking pack from the garage, the one she'd helped Harper prep for her trip just 2 weeks ago. She threw in water bottles, a first aid kit, flashlights, backup batteries, her phone charger, and the GPS unit she'd bought but Harper had insisted she wouldn't need. As she backed out of her driveway, Olivia tried calling the Cascade Ridge Ranger Station. No answer. She tried the park emergency line. It rang 15 times before disconnecting. She called 911, and when the dispatcher answered, Olivia tried to explain the situation, but even to her own ears it sounded insane. A desperate call, voices, names glowing on trees. The dispatcher promised to contact park authorities and advised Olivia to wait for official response. Olivia hung up and pressed harder on the accelerator. The drive to Cascade Ridge was a blur of dark highway and growing panic. She tried Harper's phone every 10 minutes. Sometimes it rang endlessly. Sometimes it went straight to voicemail. Once someone answered, and Olivia heard breathing, or what sounded like dozens of people breathing in synchronized rhythm, before the line went dead again. She arrived at the park entrance at 3:52 a.m. The gate was closed, which was normal for this hour, but the ranger station beside it was dark and appeared abandoned. Olivia parked and ran to the station door, pounding on it until her fists ached. No one answered. She cupped her hands against the window and peered inside. The interior was neat and orderly, but there was something off about it. The computer monitors were all on, displaying the same image, a map of the park with dozens of red dots clustered in the northwestern quadrant, near a place labeled Whispering Valley. Olivia pulled out her phone and photographed the screen through the window. Then she ran back to her car, drove around the closed gate using a maintenance road she spotted, and headed deeper into the park. The GPS unit showed Harper's last known location was indeed near Whispering Valley, approximately 8 miles from the main ranger station via the Northern Ridge Trail. Olivia parked at the trailhead as the first gray hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. She shouldered her pack, turned on her flashlight, and started walking. The forest was wrong. Olivia had hiked plenty of trails before, had spent countless weekends exploring the wilderness with Harper when her daughter was younger. She knew what a normal forest sounded like in the pre-dawn hours. Birds beginning their morning calls, small animals rustling through underbrush, the whisper of wind through pine needles, the distant sound of water moving over stone. This forest was silent, not just quiet, actively, oppressively silent, as though sound itself was being absorbed by the trees. Olivia's footsteps on the trail seemed muffled, her breathing oddly flat. Even when she deliberately snapped a branch, the crack was dampened, dying almost instantly instead of echoing through the woods. She walked faster. 20 minutes into the hike, she found Harper's backpack. It was sitting in the middle of the trail, perfectly upright and neatly positioned as though someone had carefully placed it there. Olivia's hand shook as she knelt beside it and unzipped the main compartment. Everything was inside. Harper's wallet, her research notebooks, her extra clothes, her satellite phone, still turned on, still showing full battery, but unable to get a signal despite being designed to work anywhere on Earth. Olivia grabbed the satellite phone and tried the emergency beacon. Nothing happened. She tried again. The device was functioning. The screen lit up, the buttons responded, but it simply wouldn't connect to any satellites. That's when she noticed the trees. The pines surrounding this section of trail were old growth, their trunks thick and gnarled with age, and carved into every single one of them, at roughly eye level, were names. Olivia approached the nearest tree, her flashlight beam trembling across the bark. The name, Thomas Brennan, 1987, was carved deep into the wood, the letters precise and deliberate. Below it, Sarah Chen, 1992. Below that, Marcus Wade, 1998. She moved to the next tree. More names, different years spanning decades. Some carvings were weathered and old, the letters barely visible. Others looked fresh, the exposed wood still pale. On the third tree she checked, near the bottom of a long list, she found Harper Mitchell, 2019. Olivia's vision swam. She reached out and touched the carving, and the moment her fingers made contact with her daughter's name, she heard them. The voices. They came from everywhere and nowhere, a cacophony of overlapping whispers that seemed to emanate from the forest itself. Olivia couldn't understand the words, but she felt their meaning like ice water flooding her veins. Hunger, loneliness, desperate, aching need for connection, for company, for warmth in an existence of perpetual cold and isolation. And underneath it all, one voice she recognized. Mom? Olivia spun around, her flashlight cutting wild arcs through the darkness. Harper! Harper, where are you? I'm here, Mom. I'm right here. I've always been here. The voice was coming from deeper in the forest, off the main trail. Olivia hesitated for only a moment before plunging into the undergrowth, branches tearing at her clothes and face. "Keep talking, baby, I'm coming." "We're all here, Mom. All of us together. It's not so bad once you stop fighting it. Once you accept that you belong to the forest now. That you've always belonged to the forest. That's not you talking, Harper, that's those things, those voices, you need to fight them." Olivia burst into a clearing and stopped dead. The space was roughly circular, perhaps 50 feet in diameter, and completely devoid of vegetation. The ground was bare dirt packed hard as concrete, and covering every inch of it were symbols. They'd been drawn with something dark. Olivia didn't want to think about what, and they seemed to writhe and shift in the beam of her flashlight, never quite holding still long enough to be fully perceived. In the center of the clearing stood a ring of stones, each one approximately 3 feet tall, arranged in a perfect circle. And hovering above the stones, barely visible in the pre-dawn light, were figures. Dozens of them. They were translucent, their forms constantly shifting and bleeding into one another, creating a collective mass of semi-corporeal humanity that pulsed like a diseased heart. Olivia could see their faces, hundreds of faces appearing and disappearing, their mouths all moving in that same synchronized whisper she'd heard on the phone. And there, at the edge of the collective, still partly solid, but with her edges beginning to blur and fade, was Harper. "Baby." Olivia's voice broke. Harper turned her head, and her eyes, her beautiful brown eyes that Olivia had looked into every day for 19 years, were clouded with something ancient and terrible. When she spoke, it was with multiple voices, her own threaded through with dozens of others. "You shouldn't have come, Mom. Now they want you too. They're so hungry. They've been alone for so long. Each person who died here, their soul got trapped, couldn't move on. And over the years, they found each other, merged together. They don't want to be separate anymore. They can't be separate anymore. They're trying to make me understand, trying to make me one of them." Olivia took a step forward, and immediately every figure in the collective turned toward her. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. "How do I stop this?" Olivia demanded. "How do I get you out of there?" Harper's face contorted, and for a moment, Olivia saw her daughter fighting against the voices, trying to reassert control. "The stones, they're anchors. That's what the voices are saying. The stones bind us here. But Mom, there are too many. You can't..." "How many?" 13. You'd have to break all 13 before dawn, before the collective fully absorbs me. And they won't let you. They'll do anything to stop you." Olivia looked at the stone circle, then at her watch. 4:47 a.m. According to her phone's weather app, sunrise was at 6:23 a.m. That gave her 96 minutes. She didn't hesitate. She ran to the nearest stone and slammed her hiking boot into it as hard as she could. The stone cracked, and the collective screamed. If the whispers before had been unsettling, this sound was physically painful. Olivia clapped her hands over her ears as the scream bored into her skull, 1,000 voices shrieking in rage and terror. The translucent figures surged forward, their forms extending toward her like grasping hands. Harper's voice cut through the chaos. "Run, Mom! They can't leave the circle, but they'll..." One of the spectral hands touched Olivia's arm, and agony exploded through her nervous system. It felt like being simultaneously frozen and burned, like every cell in her body was being pulled apart and reassembled wrong. She saw flashes of memories that weren't hers. A man falling from a cliff, a woman drowning in a river, a child lost in a snowstorm, dying slowly of exposure while calling for parents who would never come. Olivia tore herself away, gasping, her arm numb and tingling. But she didn't run. Instead, she grabbed a fallen branch and used it to push against the cracked stone, leveraging her full weight against it until it toppled over completely. The moment the stone hit the ground, one of the figures in the collective simply dissipated. Olivia caught a glimpse of an old man's face, twisted in surprise before he faded away entirely. The voices screamed again, but this time there was a note of fear in their chorus. "One down," Olivia muttered. She checked her watch. 4:51 a.m., 12 stones left, 92 minutes. She ran to the second stone. This one was larger, more deeply embedded in the ground. Olivia kicked at it repeatedly, each impact sending shockwaves of pain up her leg. The collective swirled around her, figures pressing as close to the stone circle's boundary as they could, their whispers a constant assault on her mind. "You can't save her. You'll fail. You'll die here. You'll join us. We'll be together forever. Mother and daughter, never apart, never alone, never lonely, never cold, never—" "Shut up!" Olivia screamed. She picked up a rock and bashed it against the stone with all her strength. A chunk broke off. She hit it again, and again, and again. The stone split down the middle. Another figure vanished from the collective. Harper's form solidified slightly, became more corporeal, more present. She was fighting them now, Olivia could see it, using every scrap of willpower to resist their pull. Olivia moved to the third stone, then the fourth. Each one was a battle. Each one required every ounce of strength she possessed. Her hands were bleeding, her muscles screaming, her breath coming in ragged gasps. But she kept going. Stone 5, stone 6. At the seventh stone, dawn was beginning to break, pale light filtering through the trees. Olivia's watch read 5:43 a.m. 40 minutes left. 6 stones remaining. That's when the forest itself began to fight back. The trees around the clearing started to move, their branches reaching down like gnarled fingers trying to pull Olivia away from the stones. She felt bark scrape across her back, felt something wrap around her ankle. She kicked free and kept working, attacking the stone with a sharp rock she'd found, chipping away at its base until it loosened. Stone 7 fell, then 8. The collective was noticeably smaller now, but the remaining voices were louder, more desperate. They weren't just whispering anymore, they were screaming, pleading, threatening. Olivia heard promises of power, offers of peace, threats of eternal torment. She ignored all of it and moved to stone 9. This one wouldn't break. She kicked it, hit it, threw her entire body weight against it, and it didn't even crack. Precious minutes ticked by. 5:58 a.m. 25 minutes until sunrise. "Mom!" Harper's voice was clearer now, almost entirely her own. "The symbols on the ground, you have to break the pattern." Olivia looked down at the dark symbols writhing beneath her feet. She dropped to her knees and began scraping at them with her fingers, clawing at the dirt, destroying the patterns. The moment she disrupted the symbols connecting to stone 9, the stone simply crumbled to dust. She used the same technique on stones 10 and 11, frantically destroying the symbols, feeling the collective's power weakening with each broken connection. Harper was almost fully corporeal now, standing separate from the collective, though translucent tendrils still connected her to the group. 2 stones left. 6:14 a.m. 9 minutes. Olivia ran to stone 12 and attacked the symbols around it. The collective made one final desperate attempt, sending out a wave of psychic force that hit Olivia like a physical blow. She saw all of them now. Every soul trapped in this place, their faces, their names, their deaths, their decades or centuries of lonely suffering. She felt their pain, their terror, their desperate need for connection at any cost. She also felt their hunger. They showed her what they would do to Harper if she failed, how they would subsume her daughter's identity completely, dissolve her into the collective until Harper Mitchell ceased to exist as an individual, became merely one voice among hundreds, screaming forever in a prison of stolen souls. Olivia screamed back at them and destroyed the 12th symbol. Stone 12 collapsed. 1 stone left, the final anchor. Harper was almost free, just one thin strand of spectral energy connecting her to the collective. But the sun was rising, golden light beginning to spill across the clearing. 6:20 a.m., 3 minutes. Olivia stumbled toward the 13th stone. Her body was failing, every muscle trembling with exhaustion, her vision swimming, her hands slick with blood and dirt. The last stone stood before her, and she knew she didn't have the strength left to break it. "Mom, you did it," Harper said, her voice weak but her own. "You did enough. I can feel myself coming back. You can stop now." But Olivia saw the last tendril still connecting Harper to the collective, saw how it pulsed and writhed. trying to pull her daughter back in. As long as that final stone stood, the collective could rebuild, could grow strong again, could reclaim Harper the moment Olivia's back was turned. "Not good enough," Olivia gasped. She looked around desperately for something, anything she could use. Her eyes fell on her backpack, still strapped to her shoulders. Inside was the emergency flare she'd packed without thinking. Olivia pulled it out, read the instructions with shaking hands, and ignited it. The flare burst to life with brilliant red light and intense heat. She jammed it against the base of the stone, against the symbols carved into its surface. The stone began to burn. It shouldn't have been possible. Stone doesn't burn. But these weren't normal stones. They were anchors, focal points for supernatural energy, and the flare's heat was disrupting whatever force held them together. The collective shrieked, a sound of such anguish and rage that Olivia felt blood trickle from her nose. The remaining figures rushed forward, pressing against the invisible barrier of the stone circle, their faces twisted in fury and desperation. The final stone exploded, fragments flying in all directions. The collective tore apart like smoke in a strong wind. Olivia saw each soul scatter, separating from the group, freed from their forced unity. Some of them looked terrified. Some looked relieved. All of them looked surprised. And then they were gone, pulled away by whatever force claims the dead when they're finally released from earthly bonds. The tendril connecting Harper to the collective snapped. Her daughter solidified completely, becoming fully corporeal, and collapsed. Olivia caught her. They lay together in the dirt of the clearing as the sun rose fully above the tree line, bathing them in warm morning light. Harper was sobbing, shaking, clutching at her mother with desperate strength. "I couldn't get away," Harper gasped. "They were in my head, Mom. All those voices, all those people, they were so lonely, they just wanted someone to stay with them. They didn't want to be alone anymore." "I know, baby. I know, but you're free now. You're safe." "The others," Harper whispered. "Did you see them? Did you see how many there were?" Olivia had seen. She'd felt every one of them when they'd touched her mind. Hundreds of souls, stretching back over a century, all claimed by this place, by whatever dark force had turned a beautiful valley into a trap for the dying and the lost. They stayed in the clearing until Harper could walk. Then they made their way slowly back to the trail, retrieved Harper's backpack, and headed toward the ranger station. The forest was different now, still quiet but naturally so, with morning birds beginning their songs and the normal sounds of wilderness returning. At the trailhead, they found park rangers waiting, along with 2 police officers. The rangers looked baffled and somewhat embarrassed, explaining that they'd received a 911 call about a missing person, but had found no evidence of anyone being in distress when they'd checked the area earlier. Olivia didn't try to explain. She simply held her daughter close and let the rangers believe whatever they wanted to believe. She and Harper drove home in silence, the early morning sun warming their faces through the windshield. It wasn't until they were safely back in Portland, sitting in their familiar kitchen with hot tea warming their hands, that Harper spoke again. "The names on the trees," she said quietly. "I saw them all, Mom. In my head. I know who they all were, where they're from. Some of them have been missing for decades. Families that never knew what happened to them." Olivia squeezed her daughter's hand. "We'll make an anonymous call. Let the authorities know where to look. Those families deserve closure." Harper nodded, then looked at her mother with tears streaming down her face. "You destroyed those stones. You freed all of them. They were trapped for so long, and you let them go. I came for you," Olivia said simply. Everything else was just in the way. But later, after Harper had fallen into an exhausted sleep in her childhood bedroom, Olivia sat alone in the dark and thought about the collective. About all those lonely souls, trapped and desperate for connection, willing to steal and consume other lives just to avoid facing eternity alone. She thought about what she would have done if she'd failed to break those stones in time. The answer scared her, but it was also simple. She would have stayed. If the only way to be with Harper was to join the collective herself, to surrender her own soul to that prison of whispers and stolen memories, She would have done it without hesitation. That's what love is, Olivia realized. That's what being a parent means. Not the big dramatic moments, but the absolute certainty that you would walk into hell itself if it meant your child wouldn't have to go alone. She checked on Harper one more time before finally allowing herself to sleep. Her daughter was safe, curled up in clean sheets, breathing easily, free from the voices that had nearly consumed her. Outside, somewhere in the distance, Olivia heard sirens. She wondered if they were heading to Cascade Ridge, if someone had finally connected the dots, if those 100+ missing persons cases were about to be solved. She hoped so. Those families deserved to know, deserved to finally lay their loved ones to rest. But mostly, Olivia was just grateful that Harper wouldn't be added to that list, that her daughter's name carved into that tree would remain nothing more than a failed attempt by forces that had finally been defeated. She closed her eyes and, for the first time in 24 hours, allowed herself to believe that the nightmare was truly over. Somewhere deep in Cascade Ridge National Park, in a clearing now empty of stones and symbols, a light rain began to fall. It washed away the dark marks on the ground, slowly erasing the last physical evidence of what had happened there. But the names carved in the trees remained, a memorial to all the souls who had been lost, and a warning to anyone who might stumble into that place without understanding what dwelled there, or what used to dwell there, before a desperate mother proved that a parent's love could be stronger than supernatural forces, more powerful than the hunger of lonely spirits, more determined than death itself. Harper woke screaming 3 nights later. Olivia was in her room before her daughter's second breath, holding her, murmuring reassurances. "They're still there, Mom," Harper sobbed. "In my dreams. I can still hear them. They're angry at me. They're saying I escaped, but I'm still connected, that a part of me will always be connected." Olivia's blood ran cold. "What do you mean connected?" Harper pulled up her sleeve. In the pale moonlight filtering through her window, Olivia could see marks on her daughter's arm. Not cuts or bruises, but something else. Patterns. Symbols. The same symbols that had been on the ground in the clearing, now appearing on Harper's skin like some kind of supernatural tattoo. They were faint, barely visible but unmistakably there. And as Olivia watched, holding her breath, the symbols began to pulse with a dim, sickly light. From somewhere very far away, or perhaps from right beside them in the darkness of Harper's bedroom, came the faintest whisper, "We're still here. We'll always be here. The stones are gone, but the connection remains, and we are so very, very patient." Olivia pulled Harper closer, her mind already racing, already planning. She'd broken the stones. She'd freed the souls. But apparently she hadn't completely severed the connection between her daughter and that place, between Harper and the fragments of the collective that had touched her mind, which meant this wasn't over, which meant she would have to find another way to protect her daughter, to cut that final thread, to ensure Harper was truly, completely free. And Olivia would do it, no matter what it cost, no matter where it led, because that's what desperate parents do. They fight impossible battles against supernatural forces. They challenge the laws of nature and death itself. They make deals with darkness if necessary, all for their children, always for their children. Outside Harper's window in the shadows of the Portland night, something moved that wasn't quite shadow and wasn't quite smoke. It watched the house with the interest of a predator that has tasted prey once and knows it can do so again. The collective might be broken, scattered to the winds, but echoes remained. Fragments. And fragments could grow, given time and the right conditions. Given a door that remained just slightly open. Given a connection that hadn't been completely severed. Olivia saw it, that shape in the darkness, and met its eyeless gaze with a mother's fury. "Not my daughter," she whispered, too quiet for Harper to hear. "Never my daughter. You hear me? I'll burn the entire forest down if I have to. I'll destroy whatever's left of you. I'll spend the rest of my life hunting every last fragment and sending it screaming back into whatever void spawned you. She's mine, and I don't share." The shadow thing paused, as if considering her words, Then, slowly, it retreated, fading back into the night. But Olivia knew it wasn't gone. Not really. It would return. They always did, which meant she needed to be ready. She held Harper until her daughter fell back into restless sleep, then carefully extracted herself and went to her computer. She had research to do, experts to find, people who understood these things, if such people even existed. Because Olivia had learned something in that clearing, something that would stay with her forever. Supernatural evil was real. It existed. It hunted. It consumed. And traditional methods of dealing with it, calling the police, seeking help from normal authorities, were utterly useless. If she was going to protect Harper from whatever still lurked in the shadows of Cascade Ridge, she would need to become something more than just a concerned parent. She would need to become a hunter herself. As dawn broke over Portland, Olivia Mitchell began planning her return to Whispering Valley, this time armed with more than just determination and hiking boots. This time she would finish what she'd started. This time she would make absolutely certain that nothing, living or dead, would ever threaten her daughter again. The forest could wait. Evil was patient. But so was a mother's love, and one of them would prove to be stronger. If this story gave you chills, follow for more quality terror. Could you survive in Olivia's place? Hope you felt real chills. If you appreciate genuine horror, consider following. Which moment scared you most? Tentar novamente o. Claude pode cometer erros. Confira sempre as respostas. The static crackled through Emma Rodriguez's satellite phone at 11:47 p.m., cutting through the oppressive silence of her downtown Anchorage apartment. She'd been reviewing geological survey data for the Alaska Department of Natural Resources when Jake's number appeared on the screen. Her younger brother never called this late. Emma? Jake's voice was barely a whisper, distorted by interference and something else. Terror. Emma, are you there? She straightened in her chair, instantly alert. 20 years of analytical training kicked in, cataloging every detail. Background noise, wind through trees, maybe 40 to 50 mile-per-hour gusts based on the pitch. No mechanical sounds, deep wilderness. Jake, what's wrong? Where are you? The Chugach. I'm in the Chugach National Forest. Something's wrong here, Em. Something's really fucking wrong. His voice broke on the last word. Jake didn't swear. Not ever. Emma grabbed a pen, her mind automatically shifting into crisis mode. Slow down. Tell me exactly where you are. What grid section? I can't think straight. It's hard to think. There's something in my head, Emma. It's been getting worse since yesterday. A long pause filled with labored breathing. I came up here to photograph the aurora patterns for my thesis, but there's something else here. Something old. The line crackled violently. When it cleared, Jake was whispering. It shows me things. Pictures in my mind that aren't mine. A family. Oh God, Em, there was a family here in 1847. I can see them dying. I can feel them dying. But that's impossible, right? There weren't settlements this deep in the forest in 1847. Emma's analytical mind raced. Hallucinations could indicate altitude sickness, hypothermia, or carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty camp stove. But Jake was an experienced outdoorsman, and he'd mentioned specific historical details. She made notes. Family, 1847, hallucinations, disorientation. Jake, listen to me. You might be experiencing altitude sickness or hypothermia. I need you to... No! His shout was raw, desperate. You're not listening. It's not sickness. There's something here that gets inside your head. It's been whispering to me for 2 days, telling me things, showing me how they died. The father tried to protect them, but it made him... The line went silent except for wind. Made him what, Jake? It made him kill them, one by one, while it watched, while it learned. Jake's voice had dropped to a monotone that made Emma's skin crawl. It wants to learn from me too. It wants to see how I break. Emma stood abruptly, knocking over her coffee mug. The ceramic shattered against the hardwood floor, but she barely noticed. "Jake, give me your GPS coordinates right now. I'm calling search and rescue." "The GPS doesn't work here. Nothing works here. Time doesn't work here, Em. I set up camp yesterday morning, but my watch says it's been 4 days." 4 days? But I only brought 2 days of food and I'm not hungry. I should be starving, but I'm not hungry at all. Her rational mind struggled to process this information. Equipment failure was possible, but multiple systems failing simultaneously was statistically improbable. Unless... Are you near any mineral deposits? Electromagnetic interference could affect your electronics. You still don't get it. Jake's laugh was hollow, bitter. This isn't about electromagnetic interference. This is about something that shouldn't exist. Something that feeds on minds, and it's getting stronger. A new sound came through the phone. A low, rhythmic thumping, like a massive heartbeat echoing through the forest. "Emma, I need you to promise me something. If I don't make it out of here, don't come looking for me. Don't let anyone come looking. This thing, it wants more minds to play with, more people to break." "Jake, stop talking like that. I'm going to... Promise me." His scream was so loud she had to pull the phone away from her ear. When she brought it back, his voice had changed completely. Calm. Cold. Not quite his own. "Or maybe you should come, Emma. You with your logical mind and your need to understand everything. You would be so much more interesting to break than your weak little brother. Yes. Come to the Chugach. Come find what's left of Jake. Come learn what it feels like when something crawls inside your thoughts and makes itself at home." The line went dead. Emma stared at the phone for a full minute, her analytical mind racing through possibilities. Psychological break? Possible, but Jake had no history of mental illness. Substance abuse? Highly unlikely. Elaborate prank? The raw terror in his voice had been too genuine. She opened her laptop and pulled up topographical maps of the Chugach National Forest, 6 million acres of wilderness, most of it completely inaccessible by road. If Jake was really in trouble, search and rescue would need exact coordinates to have any chance of finding him. But that last voice on the phone, that hadn't been Jake. The inflection was wrong, the vocabulary too sophisticated. Jake was studying atmospheric physics, not psychology. He wouldn't use terms like break in that clinical context. Emma made her decision. She would drive to the Forest Service office first thing in the morning and file a missing person report. She would provide search and rescue with all available data. She would not, under any circumstances, go into the Chugach National Forest herself. That was the logical choice. The safe choice. So why did she find herself pulling out her camping gear? Chapter 2. Into the wilderness. The Seward Highway stretched before Emma like a gray ribbon through the Alaskan wilderness, her Toyota 4Runner eating up miles of asphalt as dawn broke over the Chugach Mountains. She'd left Anchorage at 5 a.m. telling herself she was just going to establish a base camp at the Girdwood Ranger Station and coordinate the official search. She was lying to herself, and she knew it. The rational part of her mind, the part that had earned her 3 degrees and a reputation as the state's most thorough geological analyst, screamed that this was insane. Jake's phone call could have been a psychotic break, a prank, or worse, someone else using his phone. But the terrified sister in her, the one who had raised Jake after their parents died, couldn't ignore the genuine fear she'd heard in his voice, at least in the first part of the call. She pulled into the ranger station parking lot and sat for a moment, gathering her thoughts. The logical approach was clear. File the report, provide Jake's last known trajectory based on his thesis research, and let trained professionals handle the search. She grabbed her briefcase and headed inside. Ranger Tom Kowalski was a weathered man in his 60s, with eyes that had seen too much wilderness tragedy. He listened to Emma's report with professional attention, taking notes and asking relevant questions about Jake's experience level and equipment. "So he called you from somewhere in the Chugach, but no GPS coordinates?" Kowalski asked, reviewing his notes. "His GPS wasn't functioning. He mentioned electromagnetic interference." Kowalski frowned. "That's Unusual. Modern GPS systems are pretty robust, but there are some areas in the deep forest where the mineral content can affect electronics. Emma leaned forward. What kind of mineral content? Iron ore deposits mostly. Creates natural electromagnetic fields that can scramble instruments. There's one area in particular, the old Raven Creek Valley, where we've had multiple reports of equipment failure over the years. Is that a likely area for aurora photography? Actually, yeah. High elevation, minimal light pollution, clear sight lines to the north. If your brother was serious about his research, Raven Creek would be a logical choice. Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Alaskan air. How far is it? About 30 miles northeast of here, but the last 15 miles are accessible only on foot. Rough terrain, and this time of year. Kowalski shook his head. Weather can change fast up there. If he's been out there for 3 days already, hypothermia is a real concern. What about search and rescue? I'll coordinate with the Alaska State Troopers, but honestly, Ms. Rodriguez, we're talking about searching hundreds of square miles of wilderness. Without exact coordinates, it could take weeks. Emma's analytical mind processed the variables. Search area too large, weather deteriorating, Jake's condition unknown, and possibly declining. The probability of a successful rescue decreased with every hour. I want to help with the search, she said. Kowalski studied her carefully. You have wilderness experience? Some. I've done geological surveys in remote areas. I know how to use GPS, emergency communications, basic survival skills. Ma'am, with respect, this isn't a geological survey. This is a potentially dangerous rescue operation in unpredictable terrain. Emma set her briefcase on the desk and opened it, pulling out her credentials. I have security clearance for solo work in remote areas, wilderness first aid certification, and I know my brother better than anyone. I know how he thinks, where he would go, what mistakes he might make. Kowalski looked through her documentation, clearly wrestling with protocol. Finally, he sighed. I can't officially authorize civilian participation in the search, but if a qualified individual with proper equipment happened to be hiking in the general area and reported any findings to the authorities. I understand. Raven Creek Trail starts about 12 miles up the highway. There's a small parking area marked with a Forest Service sign, but Ms. Rodriguez, his expression grew serious. That's genuinely dangerous country. People have disappeared up there before. If you're not back here within 48 hours, I'm sending a full search team after you too. Emma nodded and gathered her papers. As she reached the door, Kowalski called after her. One more thing. You said your brother mentioned a family from 1847? She turned back. Yes, why? Probably nothing, but there are local stories about that area. Native legends about something that haunts the deep forest. And there was an incident in the 1920s. A trapping family that disappeared. When they finally found the camp months later, he shook his head. Might be relevant, might not, just be careful up there. The drive to the trailhead gave Emma time to organize her gear and plan her approach. She had camping equipment, emergency supplies, a satellite communicator, and enough food for 3 days. Her geological survey experience had taught her to be methodical and prepared. What it hadn't taught her was how to deal with the growing sense of wrongness that had been building since Jake's phone call. The rational part of her mind insisted it was just anxiety about her brother, but something deeper, some primitive instinct, whispered that she was walking into danger. The trailhead parking area was empty except for one vehicle, a battered blue pickup truck with a "Support Our Troops" bumper sticker. Jake's truck. Emma parked beside it and walked over to investigate. The truck was unlocked, which was typical for Jake in remote areas. His sleeping bag was missing from the truck bed along with his photography equipment, but his emergency food supplies were still there. According to her analysis, he'd planned for exactly the 2-day trip he'd mentioned on the phone. She shouldered her pack and studied the trail map posted at the trailhead. The path to Raven Creek was clearly marked for the first 10 miles, then became a dotted line indicating primitive trail, experienced hikers only. Beyond that, the map showed only topographical lines and a small notation. Historical site, 1920s trapping camp. Emma pulled out her GPS unit and marked the trailhead coordinates, then began hiking. The first few miles were straightforward, a well-maintained trail through dense spruce forest. But as she climbed higher, the path became more primitive and the forest seemed to close in around her. The trees grew larger and more twisted, their branches forming a canopy so thick that midday felt like twilight. After 4 hours of steady climbing, Emma reached a small clearing where the trail split. According to her map, the left fork led to Raven Creek, while the right fork continued toward the old trapping camp. Jake would have taken the left fork, better positioning for aurora photography. But as she started toward the left trail, something made her stop. A smell. Faint but unmistakable. Wood smoke. Jake wouldn't have a campfire during the day unless there was an emergency. Emma followed her nose toward the right fork, moving carefully through the underbrush. After 20 minutes of careful tracking, she found the source of the smoke. In a small depression between two hills, the remains of an old cabin sat next to a still smoldering fire pit. The cabin was clearly ancient, hand-hewn logs darkened with age, a partially collapsed roof, broken windows staring like empty eyes. This had to be the 1920s trapping camp Kowalski had mentioned. But someone had been here recently. The fire pit contained fresh ash and partially burned wood. Scattered around the clearing were pieces of modern equipment. A broken camera lens, strips of torn fabric that looked like they came from a high-tech sleeping bag, and something that made Emma's blood run cold. Jake's wallet, lying open in the dirt. She picked it up carefully, noting that his driver's license and credit cards were still inside. No robbery then. But why would he have come to the trapping camp instead of continuing to Raven Creek? A sound made her freeze. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling the clearing. Emma crouched behind the ruined cabin, every analytical thought in her head screaming that she should identify herself, call out for Jake, but some deeper instinct kept her silent and hidden. The footsteps stopped directly on the other side of the cabin wall. Emma. The voice was Jake's, but wrong somehow. Too calm, too controlled. I know you're here. I can smell your fear. She pressed herself against the log wall, heart hammering. Jake couldn't know she was here. It was impossible. Unless... The entity told me you would come. It showed me your decision before you made it. Jake's voice moved around the cabin as he spoke. You're so predictable, Em. So logical. You couldn't resist trying to solve the puzzle. Emma closed her eyes and forced herself to think. This could still be Jake, affected by whatever had been happening to him. Hallucinations could create the impression of supernatural knowledge while having rational explanations. Hypothermia could cause personality changes. Carbon monoxide poisoning could cause... It wants to meet you, Emma. It's been waiting so long for someone with a truly analytical mind, someone who will fight the madness longer than most. Jake's footsteps stopped directly in front of her hiding spot. Someone who will be so much more interesting to break. Through a gap in the logs, Emma could see him. He looked like Jake, same height, same build, same dark hair. But something was fundamentally wrong with his posture, his expression. He stood too still, like a predator waiting for prey to bolt. I can hear your thoughts, Emma. The entity shares them with me. You're trying to rationalize this, aren't you? Looking for logical explanations. He laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. Let me save you some time. There are no logical explanations. There's only the truth. Something very old and very hungry has been waiting in these woods for someone like you. Emma's satellite communicator was in her pack. If she could reach it without making noise, she could call for help. But the device required line of sight to satellites, and the forest canopy was too thick here. She would have to move to higher ground. The entity showed me what happened to the trapping family in 1927. Jake continued conversationally. They lasted 3 weeks. 3 weeks of fighting the intrusion in their minds before they finally broke. The father killed his wife and children with an axe, then used the same axe on himself. But not before the entity had learned everything it wanted to know about human psychology, human love, human desperation. Emma began moving carefully along the cabin wall, staying low and silent. If she could reach the tree line without being detected. "You're moving toward the trees, aren't you, Em? The entity is watching through my eyes. It sees everything I see, knows everything I know, including the fact that you're carrying a satellite communicator in the top pocket of your pack." Emma froze. There was no way Jake could know about the communicator's location. She'd packed it herself that morning. "Here's what's going to happen," Jake said, his voice taking on an almost clinical tone. "You're going to stand up and walk into the clearing. You're going to sit by the fire pit and wait while the entity decides how it wants to play with you. If you run, I'll catch you. If you hide, I'll find you. This forest belongs to the entity now, and it has had decades to learn every tree, every path, every possible escape route." Emma's analytical mind finally admitted what her instincts had been screaming. This was not a situation that could be rationalized or solved through logic. Whatever was happening here operated outside the normal parameters of reality, but that didn't mean she was helpless. She reached slowly into her pack and found the emergency flare gun she'd brought for signaling rescue teams. If she could get to higher ground and fire a flare, it might attract attention from passing aircraft. The entity is curious about your training, Emma. It wants to know how a logical mind breaks down when confronted with impossible truths. Will you accept the reality gradually, or will you fight it until the very end? Emma stood up, but instead of walking into the clearing as instructed, she fired the flare gun directly at the cabin's ancient wooden roof. Chapter 3. The Invasion. The flare hit the dry timber with a burst of red phosphorus, and decades-old wood exploded into flame. Emma was already running, crashing through the underbrush toward higher ground as Jake's scream of rage echoed behind her. "You think fire will stop it?" His voice was changing, becoming something that might have once been human, but wasn't anymore. "You think your little analytical mind can outthink something that has been hunting humans for centuries?" Emma reached a steep slope and began climbing, using roots and rocks for handholds. Behind her, the burning cabin cast dancing shadows through the forest. The fire would be visible from aircraft if any aircraft were in the area. Her rational mind cataloged escape routes, while another part of her consciousness, a part she'd never acknowledged before, whispered that she was being hunted by something impossible. "Emma!" Jake's voice came from multiple directions now, as if he were speaking from several locations simultaneously. "The entity wants you to understand something. Your brother died yesterday. What's been wearing his body is just an echo, a puppet made from his memories." She slipped on loose gravel and slid backward, tearing her hands on rough stone. When she looked down the slope, Jake was standing at the bottom, staring up at her with eyes that reflected the firelight like an animal's. "But don't worry," he continued, tilting his head at an angle that should have broken his neck. "You'll get to say goodbye. The entity always lets them say goodbye before it takes complete control." Emma forced herself to keep climbing. The slope leveled out into a small plateau with sparse tree cover, enough for a satellite signal. She pulled out the communicator and powered it on, waiting precious seconds for it to acquire satellites. "GPS signal acquired," the device announced in its cheerful electronic voice. She activated the emergency beacon and composed a quick text message. "Emma Rodriguez, emergency, Chugach National Forest, Raven Creek area. Brother missing. Something wrong here. Send help immediately." The message transmitted successfully, but Emma knew help was hours away at best. She had to survive until then. Movement in her peripheral vision made her turn. Jake was standing 20 feet away, having climbed the slope in complete silence. "The entity appreciates your resourcefulness," he said. "But you should know that your message will only bring more minds for it to study, more people to break. Every rescue team that comes looking for you will become part of its collection." Emma backed away, looking for another escape route. The plateau was surrounded by steep drops on 3 sides. Only one narrow path led back down into the forest. "Tell me about the entity," she said, surprising herself. "If it wants to study analytical minds, then it should appreciate intellectual curiosity." Jake smiled, and the expression was so alien on his familiar features that Emma had to suppress a shudder. "It's old, Emma. older than human civilization. It came here when the glaciers retreated, following the first humans across the land bridge. It learned their language, their customs, their fears. But most importantly, it learned how to think like them. As he spoke, Emma noticed something disturbing. Jake's shadow, cast by the firelight below, didn't match his movements. While Jake stood still, his shadow writhed and twisted like something alive. The native peoples knew about it, of course. They had names for it in dozens of languages. But they all meant the same thing. The thing that steals thoughts. They learned to avoid this valley, to warn their children away from the deep forest. Emma's scientific mind automatically filed the information, while her survival instincts screamed at her to run. But there was nowhere to run. The white settlers were different. They didn't listen to native warnings. They were so confident in their own rationality, their own understanding of the world. The entity found them fascinating. The shadow was growing larger now, stretching across the plateau toward Emma's feet. It would take one member of a family first, usually a child. Children's minds are more flexible, easier to invade. Then it would use that child to bring the others, one by one. Always studying, always learning new ways to break down human resistance. Emma felt something brush against her thoughts, a foreign presence subtle as a whisper. She jerked back mentally and Jake laughed. "Oh, you felt that, didn't you? The first touch. It's just curious, Emma. It wants to see how your mind works. Your brother was so simple, all emotion and instinct. But you have such interesting barriers, such logical defenses." The mental touch came again, stronger this time. Emma had the horrifying sensation of invisible fingers rifling through her memories like files in a cabinet. Her childhood, her education, her relationship with Jake, the phone call that had brought her here. "Stop it," she whispered. "The entity is particularly interested in your guilt," Jake said conversationally. "The way you blame yourself for Jake's death. You should have called search and rescue immediately instead of coming here yourself. You should have been a better sister, should have stayed in closer contact, should have noticed that he was struggling with his thesis research." Each word hit like a physical blow because they were her own thoughts, her own self-recriminations given voice. And underneath all that guilt, there's another emotion the entity finds fascinating: relief. You're relieved that Jake is gone because you were tired of taking care of him, tired of being responsible for someone else's happiness. "That's not true," Emma said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it? You raised him after your parents died, put him through college, helped him with his research. And what did you get in return? A phone call at midnight when he was in trouble, always taking, never giving." The mental intrusion was stronger now, and Emma could feel her analytical defenses crumbling. The entity was using her own thoughts against her, twisting her memories and emotions into weapons. But 20 years of scientific training had taught her something valuable: the importance of data over emotion. "You made a mistake," she said. Jake tilted his head. "Explain." "You said Jake died yesterday, but according to his truck registration, he's been paying for parking at the trailhead for 3 days. That means either your timeline is wrong, or you don't actually know when he died." The thing wearing Jake's face smiled, but the expression faltered slightly. "You also said the entity has been studying humans for centuries, learning their language and customs." But Jake used the word break in a clinical psychological context that wasn't widely used until the late 20th century. Either the entity is more recent than you claim, or it's borrowing vocabulary from someone other than Jake. Emma felt the mental pressure ease slightly as the entity redirected its attention to her words. "And most importantly," she continued, "you're trying too hard to make me feel guilty about Jake's death. Real guilt doesn't need to be coached or explained. It just exists." Which suggests that either Jake isn't actually dead, or you don't understand human psychology as well as you think you do. The silence stretched for long seconds. Then Jake began to laugh, a sound like wind through dead trees. "Fascinating," he said. "The entity is impressed. Even under extreme psychological pressure, you maintain analytical thinking. It's decided you're worth keeping alive long enough for more detailed study." Emma felt the mental invasion return, but this time it was different. Instead of rifling through her thoughts, the presence seemed to be settling in, making itself comfortable. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "The entity has been using your brother's body as a host, but meat decays quickly in the cold. Your body is fresher, stronger. More importantly, your mind is so much more interesting to inhabit." Emma felt her thoughts beginning to blur, as if someone was adjusting the focus on her internal vision. Her memories remained her own, but they seemed distant somehow, like recollections from someone else's life. "Don't fight it, Emma. The transition is easier if you cooperate. Soon you'll understand what your brother experienced. The relief of not having to make decisions anymore. The peace of letting something else control your actions." She tried to step backward and realized she couldn't move her legs. The entity was already influencing her motor control, but her analytical mind was still her own, still functioning, and it had just made a crucial connection. The entity had made another mistake. Chapter 4. The Breaking Point. "You're not controlling me," Emma said, and was surprised to hear her own voice speaking the words she'd only thought. "You're still in Jake's body. You can influence my perceptions, make me feel like I can't move, but you haven't actually invaded my mind yet." The thing wearing Jake's face stopped smiling. "You're creating a sophisticated illusion," Emma continued, forcing herself to think through the mounting psychological pressure. "Visual hallucinations, auditory distortions, false sensory input. But actual mind control would require direct neural interface, which would leave physical evidence. Cranial trauma, brain swelling, neurological damage." She took a step backward, testing her theory. Her legs moved normally. "Jake was disoriented when he called me, but he was still fundamentally himself. Still concerned about my safety, still capable of complex thought. If you could actually invade minds completely, he would have lost those capacities." The Jake thing's expression shifted to something purely predatory. "You're very good at this, Emma, but you're overlooking one crucial detail." Its voice was changing, becoming layered with other voices. Men, women, children. "The entity doesn't just invade minds, it consumes them, and your brother volunteered." Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Alaskan air. Jake was struggling with his thesis, as you correctly deduced, but not just academically. He was struggling with existence itself. The pressure of living up to his brilliant sister's example. The weight of knowing you'd sacrificed your own dreams to raise him. The growing certainty that he would never be good enough to justify your sacrifices. Each word hit like a physical blow, not because the entity was manipulating her emotions, but because they carried the ring of truth. When the entity first touched his mind, Jake didn't fight it. He welcomed it. The relief of not having to struggle anymore, not having to disappoint anyone else. He opened his thoughts willingly and let it feed on his memories, his knowledge, his identity. Emma's analytical mind processed this new information. If Jake had cooperated with the entity, that explained the rapid deterioration in his mental state during the phone call. It also suggested, "You're lying," she said. "If Jake had volunteered, he wouldn't have called to warn me. He wouldn't have told me not to come looking for him. Some part of him was still fighting." The Jake thing tilted its head with that same broken neck angle. "You're right again. A small part of your brother did resist, enough to make that phone call, enough to try to protect you." The entity found that particularly delicious, the way love could motivate resistance even in a broken mind. As it spoke, Emma noticed something that her geological training allowed her to recognize immediately. The ground around the Jake thing was wrong. The soil patterns, the way small rocks had settled, the distribution of fallen leaves. Everything indicated significant recent disturbance. Someone had been digging here. But Jake's resistance created an interesting problem. The entity continued through Jake's mouth. Partial consumption left the entity hungry, unsatisfied. It needed a complete meal, a mind that would fight harder and longer before breaking. It needed you. Emma began backing toward the narrow path off the plateau, but her movement was casual, designed to look like nervous fidgeting rather than a planned retreat. The entity has been preparing for you, Emma, learning from Jake's memories how to hurt you most effectively. It knows about your parents' death, about the way you blame yourself for not getting them to the hospital faster. It knows about your failed relationships, about the way your obsession with logic and control drives people away. The mental pressure returned, but Emma was ready for it this time. Instead of fighting the intrusion, she used her analytical training to observe it, to understand its methods. The entity was indeed capable of reading surface thoughts and recent memories. It could project realistic hallucinations, manipulate emotions through biochemical triggers, and influence motor control through psychological pressure. But it couldn't actually invade minds the way it claimed. It was a parasite, not a possessor. You feed on psychological trauma, Emma said, still backing toward the path, not minds themselves. You create situations that generate extreme stress, fear, guilt, and despair. Then you absorb the neurochemical byproducts. That's why you need hosts to stay in the area. You can't follow prey that leaves your territory. The Jake Thing's expression went completely blank. The Native Americans weren't afraid of you because you could steal thoughts. They were afraid because you could drive people insane through psychological manipulation, then feed on their suffering until they died. Emma reached the edge of the plateau and turned to run, but the Jake Thing was already moving. It crossed the distance between them in 3 impossibly long strides, and she saw that its legs had elongated, joints bending in ways that human anatomy couldn't support. Whatever was wearing Jake's body, it wasn't entirely human anymore. Emma dove sideways, rolling down the steep slope in a controlled fall that her wilderness training had taught her. Rocks and branches tore at her clothing and skin, but she managed to avoid serious injury. Behind her, the Jake Thing let out a sound that was part scream, part roar, and part something else entirely, the sound of wind through a vast, empty space. Emma hit the bottom of the slope running. The burning cabin cast wild shadows through the forest, but the fire was already beginning to die down. She had maybe 10 minutes of light left before full darkness fell. Her satellite communicator beeped with an incoming message. Emma pulled it out while running and read the text. Search and rescue dispatched. ETA 3 hours. Maintain position if possible. 3 hours. She had to survive 3 more hours. But as she ran deeper into the forest, Emma realized she was no longer running from the entity. She was running toward something else. A growing wrongness in the woods ahead that her geological instincts recognized as fundamentally unnatural. The soil under her feet was too soft, too rich. The trees were too large for their apparent age. The air smelled of decomposition despite the cold temperature that should have slowed decay. And underneath it all, barely audible, was a sound like breathing. Slow, deep, rhythmic breathing from something much larger than any human lung could produce. Emma stopped running and stood perfectly still, finally understanding the true horror of her situation. The entity wasn't just a parasite that fed on psychological trauma. It was something much older and much hungrier, and the Chugach National Forest wasn't its territory. The Chugach National Forest was its body. Chapter 5. The Truth in the Darkness. Emma stood frozen in the breathing forest, her analytical mind finally comprehending the full scope of what she faced. The root systems beneath her feet pulsed with a slow, alien rhythm. The trees around her swayed without wind, their branches reaching toward her like grasping fingers. She wasn't in a forest. She was inside something. The breathing sound grew louder, and Emma realized it was coming from everywhere at once. The ground, the trees, the air itself. Each exhalation carried the smell of centuries-old decay, mixed with something else, something that reminded her of the ozone scent that accompanied electrical storms. Her satellite communicator beeped again. Another message. Ground team dispatched from Ranger Station. ETA 90 minutes. Signal when you see lights. 90 minutes, but Emma was no longer sure that rescue was possible. How do you rescue someone from inside a living entity the size of a national forest? Behind her, the Jake Thing was moving through the woods with that same unnatural gait, its elongated legs covering ground with predatory efficiency. But it wasn't rushing anymore. It knew she had nowhere to run. Do you understand now, Emma? Jake's voice called through the darkness. The entity isn't just in the forest. The entity is the forest. 6 million acres of living, thinking tissue that learned to mimic trees and soil and stone. Emma began moving again, but more carefully now. If the forest itself was alive, then every step was potentially detected, every movement monitored. It arrived here during the last ice age when the glaciers retreated and exposed new land. At first it was much smaller, just a few acres of predatory vegetation, but it learned to grow, to adapt, to spread. Emma's geological knowledge filled in the horrifying details. The root systems of a forest could extend for hundreds of miles underground, sharing nutrients and information through vast fungal networks. If something had learned to manipulate those systems, the Native Americans knew, of course, they could sense the wrongness even if they didn't understand what they were sensing. Their warnings kept most people away for thousands of years. A branch caught Emma's jacket and she felt it tighten around her arm with muscular purpose. She pulled free and kept moving, but more slowly now, testing each step. But white settlers were different. They didn't listen to native warnings. They brought steel, axes, and fire, trying to clear the land for farming. The entity had never encountered such aggressive prey before. Emma could feel attention focusing on her now, not just from the Jake thing pursuing her, but from the forest itself. The sensation was like being watched by millions of eyes simultaneously. It learned that pain and fear were more nutritious than simple death. A human who died quickly provided minimal sustenance, but a human who suffered for weeks or months before dying. The ground under Emma's feet began to soften, becoming boggy despite the absence of water. She was sinking with each step, the forest floor trying to trap her. The trapping family in 1927 was the entity's first major experiment with psychological manipulation. It kept them alive for months, slowly driving them insane while feeding on their terror. By the time they finally died, the entity had grown large enough to cover several hundred acres. Emma reached firmer ground and paused to catch her breath. Her analytical mind was still working, still trying to find patterns and solutions even in this impossible situation. The entity learned that isolation amplified fear, confusion amplified despair, and guilt amplified both. So it began to specialize in luring people into the deep forest, then trapping them with their own emotions. But there was something the entity didn't understand about human psychology, Emma realized. Something her analytical training had taught her that pure predatory instinct couldn't grasp. Humans were adaptable. Jake was perfect prey, the entity continued through its borrowed mouth. Young, idealistic, already struggling with depression and self-doubt. The entity barely had to manipulate him at all. It just had to offer him an escape from his own thoughts. Emma pulled out her emergency flare gun and checked the remaining ammunition. 3 flares left. Not much, but fire was the one thing that had seemed to genuinely concern the entity. But you, Emma, you're different, stronger, more interesting. The entity has been preparing for someone like you for decades. It wants to see how long a truly analytical mind can maintain rationality when confronted with absolute impossible truth. The Jake thing emerged from the undergrowth ahead of her, cutting off her forward progress. Its body had changed more dramatically now. Arms stretched to twice normal length, fingers elongated into claw-like appendages, spine curved in ways that should have been fatal. The entity offers you a choice, Emma. Surrender voluntarily, and it will make Jake's death quick and merciful. Fight, and it will keep him alive just long enough for you to watch his complete psychological destruction. Emma raised the flare gun. Where is he? Right here. The Jake thing spread its arms wide. Can't you see him? He's screaming inside this body, begging for death, but the entity won't let him go until you make your decision. For the first time since this nightmare began, Emma allowed herself to feel the full weight of her emotions. Terror, guilt, grief, love for her brother, rage at the thing that had hurt him. The entity was right about one thing. Her emotions were amplifying her psychological state, making her more vulnerable to manipulation. But emotions weren't just vulnerabilities. They were also sources of strength. I have a different offer, Emma said. The Jake thing tilted its head with interest. I'll stay voluntarily. I'll let you study my mind, feed on my psychological responses, learn everything you want about analytical thinking. But only if you release Jake completely. Not just kill him. Let him go. Return his consciousness to his own body and let him walk out of this forest. The entity finds your offer interesting but ultimately pointless. It will have both of you regardless. Will it? Emma smiled grimly. Because I've figured out something important about your feeding mechanism. You need sustained psychological pressure to generate the neurochemical responses you consume. But if I stop caring about the outcome, if I achieve genuine emotional detachment, you'll starve. The Jake thing's expression shifted to uncertainty. 20 years of analytical training have taught me how to compartmentalize emotions, how to function under extreme stress, how to make logical decisions even when everything around me is falling apart. I can shut down my emotional responses faster than you can amplify them. Emma began walking directly toward the Jake thing. So here's what's going to happen. Either you release my brother and take me as agreed, or I achieve complete emotional shutdown and become useless to you. Either way, you lose one of your food sources. The entity spoke through Jake's mouth, but the voice was different now. Older, more alien. You underestimate the entity's capabilities, human. It has been manipulating minds for millennia. Your emotional defenses are impressive but not impenetrable. Then prove it. Emma stopped 3 feet away from the Jake thing and began systematically shutting down her emotional responses. It was a technique she'd learned during her parents' prolonged death from cancer. The ability to compartmentalize trauma so that it didn't interfere with necessary decisions. The fear went first, followed by anger, then grief. One by one, she isolated and suppressed the emotions that made her vulnerable to the entity's manipulation. The forest around her seemed to recoil as she achieved a state of clinical detachment. Interesting, the entity said, but the human mind requires emotional input to function normally. Sustained emotional shutdown will result in complete psychological breakdown within hours. Maybe, Emma agreed, but that's hours you won't be feeding. Hours your metabolism will be running on stored energy. How long can something this large survive without fresh psychological sustenance? The Jake thing stared at her with alien calculation behind familiar eyes. The entity will consider your proposal. In the distance, Emma could see lights moving through the forest. The rescue team was closer than expected, but she wasn't sure they would be able to help with something like this. Unless... There's one more thing you should know, Emma said. I didn't just send a message to search and rescue. I sent detailed geological data about this area to my colleagues at the University of Alaska. Soil composition, mineral content, underground formations. Everything that indicates the presence of a large, unknown organic structure beneath the forest floor. The entity's attention sharpened with predatory focus. By tomorrow morning, this area will be swarming with researchers, scientists, and media. Hundreds of people with analytical minds and sophisticated equipment, all very curious about what they'll find here. The lights in the forest were getting closer. Emma could hear voices calling her name. So you have another choice to make, she continued. Release my brother and let us both leave quietly, or deal with an invasion of people who are much harder to manipulate than isolated individuals. The Jake thing was silent for long moments. When it finally spoke, the voice was purely alien. The entity agrees to your terms, but know this, human. You have only delayed the inevitable. This forest will remain, and eventually others will come who are not as clever as you. The thing wearing Jake's body convulsed violently, spine snapping back into normal alignment, limbs shortening to human proportions. When the convulsions stopped, Jake collapsed to the forest floor. Emma rushed to his side and checked his pulse, weak but steady. He was unconscious but breathing normally. The voices in the forest were close enough now to make out individual words. Emma pulled out her satellite communicator and activated the emergency beacon, sending their exact location to the rescue team. Emma? Jake's voice was barely a whisper. What happened? Where are we? You're safe, she said, helping him sit up. We're both safe, but we need to get out of here. As the rescue team's lights finally reached them, Emma looked back at the forest. The trees swayed in a wind she couldn't feel, and for just a moment she thought she could see vast shapes moving beneath the ground. The entity was still here, still waiting. But for now, they had won. Epilogue. After the forest. 3 months later, Emma sat in her Anchorage office reviewing the final report on the Chugach incident. Officially, Jake had suffered severe hypothermia and altitude sickness, leading to temporary disorientation and hallucinations. The burned cabin was attributed to equipment malfunction. The unusual soil composition readings were classified as inconclusive pending further study. No further study was ever authorized. Jake had recovered physically, but the psychological impact lingered. He'd changed his thesis topic to atmospheric chemistry, something that could be studied from urban laboratories rather than remote field sites. He claimed he couldn't remember most of what had happened in the forest, but sometimes Emma caught him staring at maps of Alaska with a haunted expression. Her own memories remained crystal clear, filed away in her analytical mind with all the precision her training demanded. She'd written detailed reports that no one wanted to read, submitted geological surveys that no one wanted to approve. But she also noticed things that others missed. News reports of missing hikers in remote forests across Alaska, Canada, and the Pacific Northwest. Patterns in the data that suggested something was spreading, growing, learning. The entity had kept its word about releasing Jake, but Emma was certain it hadn't kept its word about leaving them alone. Sometimes, late at night, she felt that familiar mental touch, subtle as a whisper, patient as stone. It was still out there, still waiting, still learning. And Emma was no longer sure that her analytical mind was the protection she'd once believed it to be. The entity had learned something from their encounter too. It had learned that the most analytical minds might also be the most paranoid, the most likely to notice patterns that others missed, the most likely to come looking for it again. Emma's phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. The caller ID showed an Alaska State Trooper number. Ms. Rodriguez, this is Trooper Williams. We have a situation in Denali National Park. A research team has gone missing, and we found some unusual evidence at their last known campsite. The incident commander specifically requested you as a geological consultant. Emma stared out her office window at the distant mountains. What kind of evidence, Trooper Williams? Well, ma'am, it's probably nothing, but the soil around their camp appears to be breathing. Emma closed her eyes and felt that familiar mental touch, stronger now, more confident. The entity had learned patience from her. It had learned that the best prey comes willingly, drawn by curiosity and the need to understand. It had learned to wait for her to come back. I'll be there in 2 hours, Emma said, because some puzzles demanded to be solved, even when the solution might destroy the solver, especially then. If this story sent chills down your spine, follow for more psychological horror. Which moment terrified you most? The mental invasion or the realization about the forest itself? Emma had always trusted numbers, data, evidence. 23 search and rescue operations in 6 years, and she'd brought home 19 people alive. The 4 she hadn't. Those were statistics she could explain with hypothermia charts, topographical maps showing cliff faces, and autopsy reports citing exposure. Everything had a reason. Everything made sense. Until Abigail. The morning air in Cascade Ridge National Park bit through Emma's jacket as she studied the trailhead for the 4th time. September in the Cascades meant unpredictable weather, but the forecast had been clear when Abigail started her solo hike 3 days ago. Clear when she should have returned 2 days ago. Clear yesterday when Emma arrived to coordinate the search. And clear now, as Emma stared at the wooden trail marker that should have pointed toward Whispering Pine Loop, a moderate 5-mile circuit that Abigail had hiked a dozen times before. Should have pointed. But the arrow on the weathered sign seemed off. Emma pulled out her compass, then checked her GPS unit, then the printed map she'd marked up with grid coordinates. North was north. The trail was the trail, yet something in her gut, that irrational, unscientific part of her brain she usually ignored, insisted the sign was wrong. You're tired, she muttered to herself, shouldering her pack. 72 hours of coordinating volunteers, interviewing Abigail's husband Marcus, reviewing traffic camera footage from the park entrance. Of course, her instincts were misfiring. She'd driven straight here after an 18-hour shift at the fire station, surviving on gas station coffee and adrenaline. Abigail Chen, 34 years old, nurse, experienced hiker, wife. Emma's closest friend since they'd met at a wilderness first aid course 7 years ago. The kind of friend who brought homemade soup when you were sick, who listened without judgment, who texted stupid memes at 2 in the morning when both of you couldn't sleep after bad shifts. The kind of friend you didn't lose to a simple day hike. Emma started up the trail, her boots finding familiar purchase on the packed earth. She'd hiked Whispering Pine Loop herself during the initial search yesterday with the volunteer team. They'd found nothing. No torn clothing, no blood, no signs of a fall or animal attack. Abigail's car sat in the parking lot, her phone inside it, battery dead. The last ping from her GPS watch placed her somewhere on the eastern segment of the loop at 3:47 p.m. on Wednesday. Then nothing. Radio check, Emma said into her handheld. Static crackled back. Then the voice of Tom Fredericks, the park ranger coordinating the search from base camp. Copy, Emma. You're coming through clear. Heading up the eastern trail. I'll call in every 30 minutes. Copy that. Weather's holding. We've got the air unit standing by if you need it. Emma clicked off and focused on the trail. This was what she did best, systematic analysis. She'd retrace Abigail's likely route, look for what yesterday's team might have missed. Fresh eyes, focused attention, 23 operations, 19 saved. The forest closed around her like a cathedral. Douglas firs stretched toward a sky just beginning to hint at clouds. The familiar scent of pine and damp earth should have been comforting, but Emma found herself checking her compass again. Still north, still correct. So why did the trail feel wrong? She'd been hiking for 45 minutes when she noticed the first tree. Not noticed it exactly, more like recognized it. A massive ponderosa pine with a distinctive lightning scar running down its left side, bark peeled back to reveal pale wood beneath. Emma stopped, frowning. She'd photographed this tree yesterday. She had the picture on her phone. Marker number 4 along the trail, approximately 2.3 miles from the trailhead. But her GPS said she'd only walked 1.1 miles. Emma pulled out her phone, scrolling to yesterday's photos. There it was. Same tree, same scar, same angle of afternoon light. She checked the metadata, taken at 2:15 p.m., coordinates matching her current location according to the GPS. Except her GPS couldn't be right if she'd only been hiking for 45 minutes. At her pace, she'd timed it, averaged it, knew her speed over various terrains. She should be at mile 1.1, not 2.3. Equipment malfunction, she said aloud, the sound of her own voice oddly reassuring. She pulled out her backup GPS unit from her pack, powered it on, waited for satellite lock. The coordinates populated, identical to her primary unit. Both devices agreed she was 2.3 miles from the trailhead, but she'd only been walking for 45 minutes. Emma forced herself to breathe slowly. Analytical, systematic. There had to be an explanation. Perhaps she'd been walking faster than usual, distracted by worry about Abigail. She checked her fitness watch. 45 minutes, 23 seconds of activity. Average pace, 18 minutes per mile on moderate terrain. That should put her at roughly 2.5 miles. The math worked. The math always worked. So why did it feel wrong? She continued hiking, more alert now to her surroundings. The trail climbed steadily, switchbacking up the ridge. Emma counted her steps, timed her breathing, checked her compass every 5 minutes. Everything normal, everything logical. Except she passed the lightning-scarred ponderosa pine again, 20 minutes later. Emma stopped so abruptly she almost lost her balance. She stared at the tree. Same distinctive scar, same pale exposed wood, same pattern of branches. She walked closer, touched the rough bark, felt the reality of it under her fingers. This was not a similar tree. This was the same tree. Her GPS said she'd traveled another 0.6 miles, putting her at mile 2.9 from the trailhead. That's impossible, Emma said. Her voice sounded thin in the dense forest air. She pulled out her phone, opened the camera, took a photo of the tree. Then she scrolled back to the first photo she'd taken of it 30 minutes ago. Same tree. Different GPS coordinates. According to her devices, she was now 0.6 miles further along the trail, but she was looking at the exact same landmark. Emma's hands had started to shake. She clenched them into fists, forced herself to think. Equipment failure. Both GPS units failing in the same way? Unlikely but possible. Some kind of electromagnetic interference from mineral deposits in the rock. The Cascades had volcanic geology. Maybe there was some natural phenomenon affecting her instruments. She radioed base camp. Static answered her, harsh and crackling. Tom, you copy? More static, then fragments of words, distorted beyond recognition. Tom, I'm having equipment issues. Multiple devices showing incorrect coordinates. Radio communication compromised. Requesting. The static swallowed her words. Emma tried different channels, different frequencies. Nothing but white noise, occasionally broken by sounds that might have been voices or might have been wind through the trees. Electronic ghosts in the signal. Fine. She'd navigate without the GPS. She'd done it before, using map and compass and landmarks. Old school. Reliable. Emma spread her topographical map on a flat boulder, oriented it north with her compass. The trail should continue northeast for another mile before looping back west and south. She found her location, or at least where she thought she was, and plotted her route forward. Simple, straightforward. She'd been walking for 15 minutes when she found Abigail's water bottle. It sat on a flat rock beside the trail, the distinctive purple Nalgene with the nursing school sticker Abigail had refused to remove even after 10 years. Emma's heart hammered as she pulled on evidence gloves and carefully lifted the bottle. Half full. No damage to the container, no blood, no obvious signs of struggle. "Abigail!" Emma shouted, her voice swallowed by the forest. "Abigail, can you hear me?" Silence pressed back, heavy and expectant. Emma photographed the bottle, noted the exact location, or what her GPS claimed was the exact location, then continued forward more urgently. The trail narrowed, hemmed in by thick underbrush. She pushed through, calling Abigail's name, listening for any response. The trail opened into a small clearing. Emma stopped, her analytical mind trying to process what she was seeing. She'd been in this clearing before. Yesterday. She recognized the arrangement of rocks in the center, the way 3 fallen logs formed a rough triangle, the particular angle of the slope leading down to a dry stream bed. She'd searched this area with Tom and 2 volunteers, finding nothing, but now in the center of the clearing someone had built a cairn. Not a natural pile of rocks, a deliberate stack, stones balanced with careful precision, reaching about 3 feet high. Emma approached slowly, every sense heightened. The rocks were damp, recently placed. Moss grew on their undersides, meaning they'd been pulled from somewhere else, somewhere shaded and wet. She circled the cairn, looking for any other signs. The ground showed no footprints, no disturbed vegetation, just the stones, impossibly balanced, appearing in a clearing she'd searched 24 hours ago. Emma tried the radio again. Static. She tried her phone. No signal, which wasn't unusual in the Cascades. But the screen flickered strangely, the battery icon jumping from 60% to 33% to 85% in the space of seconds. "Okay," she said aloud, needing to hear a human voice even if it was her own. "Okay, someone's been here. Abigail or someone else. They built this cairn as a marker? Signal? But why? And how had they appeared and disappeared without leaving any trace?" Emma checked her GPS. According to the coordinates, she was 4.2 miles from the trailhead. That couldn't be right. She'd only been hiking for 90 minutes total, and she'd stopped multiple times. Even accounting for her faster pace, she shouldn't be more than 3 miles out. She looked back at the trail she'd emerged from, the narrow path through the underbrush, clear and obvious. Then she looked around the clearing, trying to spot where the trail continued on the other side. There were 4 trails leading out of the clearing. Emma blinked, turned in a slow circle. 4 trails, each looking equally used, equally maintained. Her map showed only one trail passing through this area, continuing northeast. But she was looking at 4 distinct paths, diverging in 4 different directions. "No," she said. "No, that's not right." She pulled out the compass. North. She oriented herself, identified which trail should be the correct one heading northeast. She marked it in her mind, the leftmost path, between 2 large cedars. Then she looked away, closing her eyes for 5 seconds, steadying her breathing. When she looked back, the trail she'd identified was now on the right side of the clearing. The cedars had moved, or she had moved, or the entire forest had rotated around her. Emma's knees weakened. She sat down heavily on one of the fallen logs, her analytical mind racing through possibilities and rejecting each one. Disorientation from stress? She'd been in far more stressful situations without losing her spatial awareness. Medical issue, inner ear infection affecting balance. She felt fine. No vertigo, no nausea. Contaminated water supply causing hallucinations. She'd been drinking from her filtered bottle, same as always. The forest around her looked normal. Trees growing straight and strong, birds calling in the canopy, afternoon light filtering through branches. Everything was as it should be, except nothing was as it should be. She stood, walked to the eastern edge of the clearing, and placed a rock on the ground, a deliberate marker. Then she walked around the clearing once, keeping it in sight the entire time, returning to where she'd started. The rock she'd placed was gone. Emma spun, searching. There, on the western edge of the clearing, the same distinctive quartz-veined stone sitting exactly where she'd left it, except she'd left it 90 degrees different from where it now rested. "This isn't possible," Emma whispered. But the evidence was undeniable. The forest was changing around her. Space itself was shifting, bending, refusing to follow the rules that had governed Emma's entire understanding of reality. She thought of Abigail, somewhere in this impossible place, and terror crystallized into determination. Equipment failure, spatial anomalies, inexplicable phenomena, none of it mattered. She would find her friend. She would bring her home. That's what she did. That's who she was. Emma chose the trail that felt right. Not the one her compass suggested, not the one her map indicated, but the path that some deep, irrational instinct told her to follow. She was beyond logic now, beyond analysis. She was operating on pure need. The trail descended sharply. Trees pressed closer, their branches forming a canopy so thick that twilight seemed to fall, despite the fact that Emma's watch insisted it was only 2:30 p.m. She'd been in the forest for less than 2 hours, but the light suggested evening was approaching. She tried to radio base camp again. This time, instead of static, she heard something worse, her own voice coming back to her, distorted and strange, speaking words she hadn't said. "Can't find the way. Going in circles. She's gone, Tom. All gone." Emma yanked the radio from her belt and stared at it. The voice continued, her inflections, her tone, but wrong somehow, hollow and desperate in a way Emma hadn't let herself become. "Please. The trail keeps changing. Nothing makes sense." She turned off the radio, shoved it in her pack. Her hands were shaking again, but this time she didn't try to stop them. Fear had its place. Fear was data. Her body telling her something was deeply, fundamentally wrong with this place. The trail curved around a massive Douglas fir, and Emma emerged onto a narrow ridge. Wind hit her face, cold and sharp, carrying the scent of coming rain. She could see for miles from here. Valley below, mountains rising in the distance, forests spreading like a green-gray ocean in all directions. And directly across the valley, perhaps 3 miles away, she could see the ranger station where she'd started that morning. She could see the parking lot, the tiny shapes of vehicles, the red roof of the visitor center. Behind her, in the direction she'd come from, should have been deeper forest, more ridges, the heart of the park. But when Emma turned around, she saw the parking lot again. The same ranger station, the same red roof, except it was in the wrong direction. Emma looked east, parking lot, west parking lot, north parking lot, south parking lot. 4 directions, 4 identical views, as if she stood at the center of a mirror-lined room, showing her the same scene repeated endlessly. "No," she said, louder this time. "No, no, no." She pulled out her compass. The needle spun lazily, making a full rotation, then another, refusing to settle. Her GPS showed coordinates that placed her simultaneously at 4 different locations, the numbers flickering and changing faster than she could read them. Emma squeezed her eyes shut. This was stress, fatigue, some combination of environmental factors she didn't understand yet. There would be an explanation. There was always an explanation. When she opened her eyes, the 4 parking lots remained. But now, in the distance, she could see figures moving. Tiny, human shapes. One of them waved. Hope surged through her. She waved back, shouting, her voice lost in the wind. The figure continued waving, and Emma realized it was waving exactly as she was waving. Same rhythm. Same motion. The figure was her. Emma lowered her arm. The distant figure lowered its arm. She took a step forward. The figure took a step forward. She was watching herself, 3 miles away, mirroring her movements from across an impossible valley. She turned away from the ridge, stumbling back toward the trail. The forest had gone wrong, twisted, and she needed to get away from this place, needed to find Abigail and get out before... Before what? Before reality unraveled completely. Too late for that. The trail she'd emerged from was gone. In its place, 3 trails, each descending in slightly different directions. Emma chose the middle one, practically running now, her analytical mind in free fall. Nothing made sense. Nothing could make sense. The laws of physics, of geometry, of basic spatial relations, all of it was breaking down. She ran for 5 minutes before she had to stop, gasping, her lungs burning. The trail had leveled out, running through dense undergrowth. She bent over, hands on her knees, trying to catch her breath. When she straightened, she saw the first body, not Abigail. Emma's mind registered that immediately, relief and horror mixing in equal measure. A man, middle-aged, wearing hiking gear at least a decade out of date. He sat with his back against a tree, arms resting on his knees, head tilted back as if he'd just stopped to rest and never woke up. Emma approached slowly, professional training overriding panic. She checked for a pulse, knowing she wouldn't find one. The body was desiccated, mummified by dry forest air, but there was no decomposition, no scavenger damage. He looked like he'd been here for decades, but his clothing, while old, wasn't rotted. His face was peaceful, eyes closed, mouth slightly open as if in the middle of a conversation. There was no ID on him, no pack, no supplies. Just a man who'd stopped walking and never started again. Emma stood, backed away. This was wrong in a different way than the shifting trails and impossible vistas. This felt intentional. A warning. She continued forward, more cautiously now. Within 10 minutes, she found 3 more bodies. All hikers, all in similar poses of rest or contemplation. 2 women and another man, spread out along the trail at irregular intervals, each sitting or lying in positions that suggested they'd simply decided to stop. Their clothing dated them across different decades, the most recent wearing gear from the early 2000s, the oldest in what looked like 1970s era equipment. None of them showed signs of trauma or violence. They just stopped. Emma's radio crackled to life on its own, even though she'd turned it off. Tom's voice came through, but wrong, speaking too fast, words overlapping. Emma report, Emma report, Emma report. Then another voice, unfamiliar. They all came looking. They all walked the wrong trails. Then Abigail's voice, clear and close. Emma? Emma, where are you? I can see you. Why can't you see me? Abigail? Emma grabbed the radio. Abigail, where are you? Tell me where you are. I'm right here, Abigail's voice said, now distant and strange. I've been right here the whole time. You keep walking past me. Why do you keep walking past me, Emma? Give me landmarks. Describe what you see. Trees, Abigail said, and now her voice was layered, multiple versions speaking at once. Trees and trails. Trails that move, Nothing stays still, Emma. Nothing stays where you leave it. I've been walking for days, but I think it's only been hours or maybe years. Time is different here. Space is different here. Emma, I don't think I can leave. Yes, you can, Emma said fiercely. I'm coming to find you. Just stay where you are. Abigail's laugh was broken. Wrong. Stay where I am? Where am I, Emma? Where is anywhere? I'm everywhere and nowhere. I'm on the trail behind you and the trail ahead of you and the trail that doesn't exist yet. The forest is hungry, Emma. It eats space. It eats time. It's eating me. The radio went silent. Emma shook it, pressed the transmit button, got nothing but dead air. She looked at the bodies around her. They all came looking. They all walked the wrong trails. And suddenly, Emma understood. These weren't just lost hikers. These were searchers. People who'd come into the forest looking for someone else and gotten trapped by whatever impossible force was bending reality in this place. The forest had consumed them, turned them into warnings that no one could read. How many searchers? How many over the decades, walking into this place and never walking out? Emma checked her watch. 3:15 p.m. She'd been hiking for roughly 3 hours, though her sense of time had become unreliable. She should still have several hours of daylight left. She looked up at the sky, seeing twilight. She looked at her watch again. 7:42 p.m. 4 hours had passed in seconds, or no time at all, or she'd been standing here for days. She forced herself to move, to keep walking. The trail continued, and she followed it because there was nothing else to do. Every analytical tool she possessed had failed her. Her instruments lied. Her observations contradicted each other. The physical world refused to behave consistently, but she would find Abigail. That was the only certainty left. The trail descended into a ravine, and Emma noticed the trees were wrong. The same trees, repeated. The exact same pattern of branches, the exact same arrangement of bark. She was walking through a forest of copies, of iterations, like a video game rendering the same texture again and again to save memory. Except this wasn't a game. This was real, or had been real, or was becoming unreal in ways Emma's mind couldn't process without fracturing. She found the second cairn at the bottom of the ravine, larger than the first, nearly 6 feet tall, stones balanced in configurations that should have been impossible. Encircling the base of the cairn, written in smaller rocks arranged carefully on the ground, were words, "Help me, help me, help me, help me, help me." The same phrase, repeated over and over, spiraling outward from the cairn in concentric circles. Emma counted 37 iterations before the message disappeared into the surrounding undergrowth. "Abigail," Emma whispered. She recognized this as her friend's work. Precise, methodical, using what materials were available to communicate. Abigail was an organizer, a planner. Even trapped in impossible circumstances, she'd tried to leave markers, messages, evidence of her presence. Emma pulled out her phone to photograph the cairn and the message. The screen showed 17 missed calls from herself, all time-stamped from tomorrow. Her battery read -43%. The date displayed as September 47th, 2019. She powered off the phone, no longer trusting anything her devices told her. The trail continued past the cairn, but now Emma could see that it branched, split, diverged into dozens of paths, some climbing back up the ravine walls, others tunneling into the earth, a few seeming to simply end in mid-air. She stood at the center of an impossible intersection, surrounded by choices that all felt wrong. "Where are you?" she asked the forest, asked Abigail, asked whatever presence was bending reality around her. "What do you want?" The wind answered, carrying sounds that might have been voices, might have been water over rocks, might have been the forest itself breathing. Emma listened, trying to parse meaning from noise, and slowly realized she could hear words. "Round and round," the wind whispered. "Round and round the trails that bind. Seeking, seeking, never finding. The forest keeps what the forest takes." "I don't accept that," Emma said. "I'm taking her home." "Home?" The whisper might have been laughter. "Which home?" The one behind you? The one ahead? The one you left? The one you'll never reach? All trails lead home. All trails lead away. All trails lead to the same eternal walking. Emma felt tears on her face, anger and fear and frustration mixing. She'd spent her entire career being competent, capable, analytical. She'd saved 19 people through careful planning and systematic execution. She'd trusted evidence, trusted procedure, trusted the fundamental reliability of the physical world. And now that world had revealed itself to be as thin and uncertain as mist, changing on whims she couldn't understand, following rules she couldn't learn. But crying wouldn't bring Abigail home. Analyzing the situation wouldn't bring Abigail home. Emma had run out of tools, out of training, out of everything that had defined her competence. All she had left was stubbornness. She chose a trail at random. No, not random. She chose the trail that felt most wrong, most unsettling, most alien. The one that tilted at an angle that made her eyes hurt to follow. If the forest was eating space and time, if reality itself had become fluid, then maybe the most impossible path was the only real one. Emma walked. The trail twisted in ways that shouldn't have been possible, sometimes vertical, sometimes seeming to loop back on itself while continuing forward. Gravity shifted, though Emma couldn't say how she knew this, only that her body understood she was walking on surfaces that in a rational world would have been walls or ceilings. Time came unmoored. She walked for hours or minutes or days. Her watch had stopped working, the hands spinning backward and forward at random. She was hungry, but not hungry. Thirsty, but not thirsty. Exhausted, but wired with adrenaline that never faded. And then she found Abigail. Her friend sat in a small clearing, if a space constantly shifting its dimensions could be called a clearing, surrounded by cairns. Dozens of them, various sizes, arranged in patterns that hurt Emma's eyes to perceive directly. Abigail's back was to Emma, her dark hair tangled with leaves and pine needles, her hiking clothes torn and dirty. "Abby," Emma said, her voice hoarse. Abigail didn't turn around. "You shouldn't have come," she said. Her voice was Abigail's voice, but not, layered with echoes, with harmonics that suggested multiple versions speaking in unison. "No one should have come. No one can leave." "I'm taking you home," Emma said. "There is no home." Abigail laughed, and the sound made Emma's skin crawl. "There is no anywhere. There's just here, just the forest, just the trails that go everywhere and nowhere. I've been walking, Emma. I've been walking for 3 days or 3 years or 3 minutes. I've walked every trail in this park 1,000 times. I've found the parking lot 57 times, but every time I get close, the trail changes. Brings me back here. Back to the center that isn't a center." Emma walked closer, circling to see Abigail's face. Her friend looked stretched. That was the only word Emma could find, as if Abigail existed slightly out of phase with reality. Her edges blurred, her features subtly wrong in ways Emma couldn't quite identify. Her eyes were Abigail's eyes, but also not, containing depths and distances that eyes shouldn't hold. "The forest is teaching me," Abigail said. "Teaching me how space works, how time flows. They're not what we thought, Emma. They're not fixed. They're choices. The forest chooses, and it's chosen us." "No," Emma said firmly. "I don't accept that. We're leaving." "Leaving?" Abigail tilted her head, and the motion continued too far, her neck bending at an angle that should have been painful. "Which way is leaving? I've tried every direction. Every direction is the same direction. Every trail is the same trail. We're already everywhere we could ever go." Emma grabbed Abigail's hand. It felt real, cold, solid, undeniably physical. She pulled, and Abigail stood, unresisting. "Come on," Emma said. "We're walking out of here." "We're already walking," Abigail said. "We never stopped walking. Walking is all there is." Emma didn't have a plan. She didn't have evidence or analysis or methodology. She just had determination and Abigail's hand in hers, and she started walking. Not choosing any particular trail because choosing implied that choices mattered, and clearly they didn't. She just walked, pulling Abigail with her, refusing to stop. The forest shifted around them. Trees became walls, became cliffs, became rivers, became sky. The trail rose and fell and twisted, and Emma kept walking. Her legs ached, then stopped aching, then didn't feel like her legs at all. Time passed or didn't pass. The sun set and rose and set again in minutes or hours or years. "You'll understand soon," Abigail said, her voice almost kind. "The forest is patient. It teaches everyone eventually. Space is just permission. Time is just agreement. And we've stopped agreeing, Emma. We've stopped allowing anything to be solid." "Shut up," Emma said, not unkindly. "Save your breath for walking." They walked through impossible geometries, through spaces that folded and unfolded like origami. Emma saw other hikers, the bodies she'd found earlier, but now they were moving, walking their own endless paths, trapped in loops they couldn't perceive. She saw versions of herself, dozens of Emmas taking different trails at different times, all searching, all failing. She saw the ranger station appearing and disappearing, always close, never reachable. And slowly, gradually, Emma stopped trying to understand. She stopped analyzing. She stopped trying to force the forest to make sense. She just walked, holding Abigail's hand, putting one foot in front of the other, trusting nothing except the simple physical act of movement. The analytical part of her mind, the part that had defined her entire identity, went quiet. Maybe it broke. Maybe it finally accepted that some things couldn't be analyzed, couldn't be explained, couldn't be solved through methodology and data. And in that silence, in that surrender of certainty, something changed. The trail solidified under Emma's feet. Not all at once, not obviously, but gradually the wrongness receded. Gravity reasserted itself in familiar ways. The light began to behave like light instead of something thick and liquid. "No," Abigail said, and now her voice held panic. "No, you can't. You can't make it real again. It doesn't work that way." But Emma wasn't making anything real. She was simply walking without expectation, without demanding that the universe behave rationally. She'd stopped trying to impose order on chaos, stopped fighting the forest's fluid nature, and in ceasing to fight, she'd somehow found solid ground. The clearing ahead looked real, normal. Trees growing straight, grass covering the ground, afternoon sunlight streaming through branches, and beyond it, perhaps 100 yards away, Emma could see the parking lot. The actual parking lot, singular in one direction only. She could see her truck, Tom standing beside it, scanning the tree line with binoculars. "There," Emma said, pointing. "We're almost out." Abigail pulled against her grip. "I can't," she said, and now she sounded terrified. "Emma, I've been here too long. I've walked too far. I'm part of it now, part of the trails that never end." "Bullshit," Emma said. "You're my friend and you're coming home." She pulled harder and Abigail stumbled forward, resistance crumbling. They crossed the clearing together, and with each step, Abigail became more solid, more real, less like the stretched, impossible thing she'd been in the forest depths. Her edges sharpened. Her face returned to familiar proportions. She was just Abigail again, exhausted and frightened and crying, but real. They emerged from the tree line into the parking lot. Tom shouted, running toward them. Emma's legs gave out, and both she and Abigail collapsed onto the asphalt, solid and real and undeniably mundane. "Jesus Christ," Tom said, grabbing his radio. "I've got them. I've got both of them. Send the medics." Emma lay on her back, staring up at a sky that was just a sky, blue and vast and comprehensible. Her watch showed 4:47 p.m., same day she'd entered the forest. Less than 6 hours had passed in the real world, while inside the forest she'd walked for days or years or eternities. Abigail was shaking, sobbing, still muttering. "It's not possible. We can't be out. The trails don't end." "They do," Emma said, taking her friend's hand again. "For us they do." But she was lying. She knew she was lying. Because as the medics arrived and Tom coordinated their evacuation, and normal reality reasserted itself in all its bureaucratic mundanity, Emma looked back at the tree line and saw the trails waiting. Multiple trails, Impossible trails, trailing off into spaces that shouldn't exist. And standing at the entrance to each one, Emma saw herself, still searching, still walking, still trapped in the forest's endless geometries. Versions of herself who'd made different choices, taken different paths, surrendered at different moments. All of them still walking, still looking for Abigail, caught forever in the forest's malevolent embrace. She'd gotten out, but part of her never would. Emma closed her eyes, let the medics guide her to the ambulance. Abigail was alive. That was what mattered. That was the win. 19 people brought home alive, 20 now. She didn't mention the other Emmas to anyone. Didn't try to explain what had happened in the forest, how space and time had unraveled, how reality had revealed itself to be far more fragile than anyone believed. They wouldn't understand. They couldn't understand, and trying to explain would only make them question her sanity. But 3 weeks later, when she returned to work, Emma found herself checking the news obsessively, checking missing persons reports from Cascade Ridge National Park, and finding them one after another. Hikers disappearing into trails that should have been simple, day hikes that people never returned from. The forest was still hungry. The forest was always hungry. And now Emma understood why none of the bodies she'd found had shown signs of trauma. They hadn't died. They'd just gotten lost on trails that never ended, walking forever through spaces that refused to stay fixed, searching for exits that moved every time they got close. Until eventually they'd stopped walking, sat down, closed their eyes, and let the forest keep them. Emma thought about the versions of herself still walking, still trapped, still searching. She thought about the trail markers that pointed in impossible directions, the cairns spelling out desperate messages, the ranger station that existed in 4 directions simultaneously. She'd brought Abigail home through sheer stubborn refusal to accept the impossible, but she knew, with bone-deep certainty that defied her analytical nature, that the forest hadn't let them go out of defeat. It had let them go as bait, as stories that would spread, that would bring more searchers, more analytical minds trying to solve an unsolvable mystery. More people walking into the forest, confident in their methodology, trusting their instruments, believing that reality followed rules. And reality did follow rules, Emma had learned, just not the rules she'd thought. The forest had its own rules, and they were patient and hungry and waiting. If this story gave you chills, follow for more quality terror. Could you survive in Emma's place?